Well, welcome back. This part of the tutorial we are going to give you a quick demo, just a very quick run through of an example in Korean. And but the main thing I want to do over the next, I don't know, 15 minutes is to get you very familiar with the semantic representation that we have. So let's start off with that at a very top level, and we're going to come back to some of the details. But when you start LA and you go to a particular text, and I'll show you how to move around later after when we're actually running the tutorial part of it and you're following along with me. But say we've got to this text, this infected eye text that is one of the texts that we like to translate. The semantics then comes up, and you can move around. You can do next text, previous text to move to the different paragraphs. You can look at things in a tree shape, the semantics in a tree-shaped view here, or you can unclick that and it goes to a more of a linear view. Believe it or not, this is the view that I like better than the tree view, but I think a lot of people like this better. So as we talked about in the last tutorial in that section of the videos, the semantics composed of three main things. There's a structural thing, and you can see the structures. There's noun phrases, there's clauses. If I just get out of here and go to this without there, and if I put it into single sentence mode, so we only see a single sentence. There, it's easier to see. So we have clauses, you have noun phrases, you have verb phrases. It is a little misleading because noun phrase and verb phrase sounds like surface type syntax stuff, where this is really semantics that we're looking at. Or let's put it the way I put it before. It's an unambiguous representation. And so it's made up of the structural parts where things are related. So for instance, there's a verb phrase, and in this clause there's the head verb phrase, and it has various arguments, various noun phrases as arguments. Then on the top line here are the disambiguated English word senses, or just concepts. So for instance, like this is a concept. It's an adposition, which is something that relates two nouns together, and its name. If you put your mouse over anything, it'll show you the definition. So for instance, this marks someone's name, whereas this concept just means a young woman. To sit, if you put your cursor over any event or verb, it'll show you the definition. It'll show you the argument structure that is expected for that particular event, and it'll show you some examples of it. And the middle lines here then are the semantic features. So for example, for nouns, we have things like number, starting about the fourth one down, number, participant tracking, polarity, proximity, person, surface realization. And in a few minutes we'll get back to these. For verbs, there's time, aspect, mood, reflexivity, things like that. So at a high level, that's what it is. Like I say, we're going to come back and look a little bit more at the ontology. So we'll look at what kind of concepts they have, and we'll look more closely at these features. But that's a good enough intro to do a quick demo. So we have this sentence: the girl named Melissa sat outside the house. This is the unambiguous representation. Oh, and I should say these lines down here, the bottom line is we have a Korean grammar loaded. So these are before you translate it, these are words that are mapped to these concepts in the Korean lexicon. So for instance, the word girl, the concept girl, is mapped to this. Now that doesn't mean that in the final translation that it'll come out like that. It's just the initial, like if you look up this word in the Korean lexicon, it will be mapped to the concept girl. This will be mapped to the concept sit. There might be rules that in the end completely change it to something else, but that's how it's mapped. And so before you push the generate button, that's what you see on the bottom line. So let's just go ahead and click the generate button, and it goes through and it applies all the rules. So we'll see what the rules look like in a minute. And so here's your output, And here now, if you read the Korean off from left to right here, you'll see that it comes out exactly what it's up here. But this is all this is what this structure looks like, rearranged by all the rules with various things added. Like for instance, this is added by a particular rule. It adds this auxiliary verb. Okay, so what do these rules look like, and what does the lexicon look like? Well, you can see over here. This looks like the rendering got a little messed up here. Let's see what we can do about that. Like here is the lexicon for nouns. Let's just look at it while we're here. You put in the root words and glosses, and for each part of speech you can define different kinds of features. So in Korean, it's important to know whether it takes a plural morpheme, what kind of noun it is, and the classifier, whether it has one or not. Let's see some examples with classifiers. So it's a classifier for non-honorific human. Okay. See if there's a couple other ones. Okay, so like that, and takes honorable morphemes. Okay, so these are features that the grammar writer sets up. Let's look at verbs, see if there's anything here. So verbs, here again, here's the stems and various features that the grammar writer thought were important. We can also do forms. In Korean, there aren't really forms of verbs, at least not how we've set it up. I could show you in a few minutes an example, a Spanish example with forms. Let's go back to lexicon and grammar development screen. Okay, this rendering issue was fixed over here. So again, let's just generate that sentence. And once it's generated, you can put the cursor underneath anything. So for example, sit. You can put the cursor here and it'll show you all the rules that were applied in this pop-up box. So for instance, there was this some features were changed, and then the spell out rule where it added the INFL morphemes for the tense that they needed. Over here, if you put the cursor under here, this was inserted by a transfer rule, auxiliaries. You can then, instead of just mousing over, you can right click. So right click there and you can say display list of all rules that applied during generation process that were connected to that. And you can go down here and you can see, okay, here's this transfer rule. Now if I double click on it, here's the rule that inserted that particular morpheme. And this rule has an input structure and an output structure. So this is one kind of rule that's used. These are structural adjustment rules. These are used to add things into the text and to change things around at a certain kind of at a certain I don't want to say deep level, but at a level that we also have rules that we call spell out rules that are on a surface level. These are a little bit of a deeper level. We'll show you examples of when to use structural adjustment rules as opposed to spell out rules later. Okay, so let's look at a couple spell out rules. If we click here and go to nouns, I'm sorry of how this is. This is the first time I've ever seen this having problems. This first time I'm on a Mac here, and it's the first time I've used this. It's Parallels Windows emulator. And I don't know, maybe there's something to do with that causing this. Okay, so here's a spell out rule that adds a suffix when the noun number is plural. So these rules get applied one after another. How the program works is it goes through from left to right, the input, and at each spot it goes through and it tries to apply all the rules. So if there's a noun, it'll get here and it'll say, oh, noun, does this noun have this feature? And if it does have that feature, it'll add then the suffix. It'll just do what it says. So that's a simple rule. Let's see if there's like down here for some pronoun rules. Sorry, I meant to. Here we go. So there's a table. You can make table rules up. So this, if you want to use a pronoun, it looks at the person of the noun and the number, and it'll insert the correct, the correct pronoun. These kind of spell out rules can do a number of things. Well, they can be simple ones or table rules, but then each one of those can do a couple of different things. It can insert a prefix, a suffix. It can change the translation. So for a pronoun, that's what you want to do. Whatever the noun was, translation of it before, you want to just completely change it to this pronoun form. Or in certain cases, you want to add words. Like if you want to add an auxiliary to a verb phrase, you can use these to do that. So those are spell out rules. Of course, later in the tutorial, we're going to get into writing these together. We'll see examples and how and when you use them. Then there are phrase structure rules. These control your ordering. So let me just show you an example in Korean. This is the ordering that you want enforced within a clause, and just picking out a few. So an NP, that's a clause introducing oblique, the addressee. Then you can get down, you put the topic first. The topic, then you have various obliques that you put in there, and somewhere in there was the verb phrase. There's the verb phrase. So I don't know anything about I don't know anything at all about Korean, but this looks like an SOV language to me. Well, I mean, it's we're not calling it subjects here, we're calling it topics. So topic, and then objects, and then verbs. Like I said, I don't know anything about Korean. I didn't do this. Dr. Allman did this grammar. Okay, so a lot of these things, like these things, addressee, significant time, significant location, these are things that you define. These are features that you define for your language, and then you have rules. This is how in general LA works. You define features that are going to be useful to make these rules very simple, and then elsewhere you write rules to set the rules. So when is an NP an addressee? You write a rule and you set it correctly. When is it a significant location, etc., etc. And then these rules are fairly simple. Same thing. That's in general what you want to do. Is these are surface rules down here, all of these. And what you want to do for most of these is make them very simple, have them controlled by some features that you've defined that are relevant for your language. Make them simple. And then from here, like from here on up, you write the rules that define those features and set them to the appropriate values in appropriate situations. Okay, so that is a quick demo of the kinds of rules that are available. I showed you three. I showed you a structural adjustment rule. I showed you a spell out rule. I showed you a phrase structure rule. Let's look at one other kind, a feature copying rule. There is a subject verb agreement, at least in reference to the honorable morphemes. And so what this does is you can set up a rule that has this, and it shouldn't be subject agreement, it should be topic agreement, topic verb agreement. So you set up this noun, set up the input, and you want this noun phrase to be the one that's the topic. And when that's the case, you copy over the feature from the noun to the verb, and there's this feature having to do with whether that noun takes honorable morphemes or not. And you copy that over to the verb, and now all of the verbs will have a feature about that indicates whether the topic of that sentence takes this honorableness, and then apparently then there's some rule that will then use that. The verb changes depending on whether the topic noun is honorable or not. So those are the big categories of rules. There's the structural adjustment rules, that set up structural inputs, and then the outputs. You can change things around, you can delete things, add things, and we'll show you examples of that. There are then feature copying rules that are used in agreement. There's these spell out rules then that do just what it sounds like. It spells out things in the target language, and there are various ways to do that. You can add prefixes, suffixes. You can change the translation. You can add words, and then there are these phrase structure rules. If you can, if we at the end of this tutorial can master those rules, that is like 95% or more of Linguist Assistant. On top of that is the lexicon, and what I wanted to do is show you an example of forms before we get going. Before I go back, and as I promised, I wanted to show you a little bit more in depth what these features are. So what I wanted to do is show you an example of a language that used forms, which would be Spanish. So we load the Spanish and we go over to the lexicon target and we'll look at verbs. So this is just a toy thing to exemplify forms. But when we click on forms, I've shown the present tense forms of each verb. So here's the infinitive form, then the first singular, second singular, third singular, first plural, third plural. These are the common forms of Spanish. And you can see that they're all filled out. Everything that's not in white was filled out automatically by a rule. So let me just show you these rules. These rules are a type of spell out rule, but they apply in the lexicon. And so well, let's show you this. For the infinitive, notice the stem is here, and then the infinitives are here. And the infinitive form depends on what class of what the verb type is. So before we show you that, we have to go back and show you the features. So the main feature that we've added for Spanish verbs is their type, and it can be either an AR verb, an IR verb, or an ER verb. So that's them. And if we go now to the form rules for the infinitive, you can see that for AR verbs we add an AR, for IR verbs we add an IR, for ER verbs we add an ER for the infinitive. For present tense, for present first singular, all of them get an O, whether or not whatever the feature. All AR verbs, IR verbs, doesn't matter. They all get the same thing. Now, yeah, so that's the form. So you notice all it did on here is it added O to the stems. And that's what the automatic rule does. And then you can see these things in white. These were irregular verbs that we went in and had to change by hand. Let's look at another example. So this is second singular. For AR verbs, you add AS. For IR and ER verbs, you add ES. And so again, you can see here that that's what it does. It adds ES for an ER verb. It adds AS for an AR verb. And down here for an IR verb, it added ES. And this, it tried to do it. It just added ES to that, but it was irregular. So we went in and changed it by hand. You can change things by hand by just by just clicking on it, and then you can start typing. So, and then it'll show that it's irregular by being in this white box. So this just sets up the forms. This doesn't tell you when to use it. So in Spanish, you use this when you want present tense and when the subject noun is first singular. So there are going to be a whole other set of rules in a Spanish grammar that decide which form you want to use in a given situation. This simply sets up the forms in the lexicon. All right. So if we went to here, back to this infected eye, let's go back to the sentence. And I can't remember why this is purple in this language. Oh, there. It was some sort of, I don't know why it was purple. Okay, So here is the semantic representation, and what I wanted to do was to go back and show you some of the features. Let's get right out of this tree view again. Let's go into single sentence view, and here we go. Well, okay, sorry. All right, so again, semantics is structure, it's word senses, and its features. So I wanted to show you a little bit more in a view of the ontology and of the word senses of the features, semantic features. So let's start with the ontology. So you mouse over the concept here, and it'll show you that it'll show you the definition of it, and it'll show you the argument structure and some examples. Also, this is if you look down here, it says lexical sense A. This is lexical sense A of the concept sit. Now there could be other senses of the word sit in there, and so that's what I want to do, is go and I show you the ontology for events, and to help us get a feel for when we make different word senses and why we do that and why we use it. So this is our ontology. We're working right now on a view that makes this more hierarchical, but for now it's just an alphabetical arrangement. And you can see right off the bat that we have three senses of agree. The first one is to agree with someone that something is true, and then the second one is to agree to do something, and the third is to agree that someone else should do something. So right there you can see it's a good example, because there are two different reasons for making different senses. First of all, this first sense has somewhat different meaning than this. I think that's pretty clear. You agree, I agree that that's true. Like affirm or something like that. Whereas these two are, you're agreeing, like you're, I don't know a synonym right off the top of my head, but you're agreeing to do some action. You're not agreeing that there's some state is true. So that's obvious. You want to have two different senses. Now, why do we have two different senses here? Well, the reason is that it makes things extremely much more simple if you separate into senses different usage types. So, for instance, this one is there is an agent or some sort of an agent-like person who's agreeing to do something, whereas this one is somebody agrees that somebody else should do something, and so the argument structure is completely different. This takes a noun there, and then some sort of clause, whereas this says takes a noun. The second one. This takes a noun and a clause, and you can see that in translating that, it would be much more convenient to be able to treat these two different cases separately, with different lexicon entries maybe, or different rules that set up the argument structure differently. And so that's what we do. Another example, ask. We have several senses of ask: to ask a question, to request something from someone, to ask someone to do something, to ask someone about something, and then we have a direct speech asking a question, and an indirect speech asking somebody a question. So again, a lot of those are, some of them are different, like to ask somebody to do something versus he asked a question, and then some of those in there are the inquiry type of meaning, but they have different argument structures. Looking at this, at be, we have lots of different senses of be. So in English, we use be. Be is sort of a connector, and so we could have done this, getting rid of be's and just using semantic properties, semantic relations. But to make it easy, what we've done to make it a little bit easier, in one sense at least, we've kept be in there as a connector. So John is a teacher would use be, but then we've specified the very specific sense of be that we're talking about. So there are things like equative, class membership, prefix, essential, locative, possessive, benefactor, company, date, social role, kinship role, time, and in the semantic representation of a text that we want to translate, it'll specify very specifically which one of these are. And if you think about it, in various languages you might translate a kinship role, like Mary is Frank's mother, versus differently than a social role. Mary is a doctor. The verbal part or whatever might be completely different. So that's the ontology. Similarly, and looking at the verbs or events, it's certainly the more complicated, because these have inherent frames. In the nouns, it's more just it's more a case of separating out actual meaning differences. So, for instance, for bank, we would have a financial institution sense and like a bank of a river type of sense. Those kind of distinctions that we're used to seeing in semantics. So that's whenever you see these English looking bold things up here, these are English word senses. And we also have things like adpositions. So this relates one noun, girl, to Melissa. And so we have a list of those. Let's just quickly look at those. Look at our adpositions. Semantically speaking, there are relations. And so we have these things down here, kinship, made of. So like Frank's mother, made of, iteration, all of these things. And we also then, so these are all very semantic-y type terms. Then we also have a set of English word senses, like various meanings of for, various meanings of in. So like you can be in a place, like in France, or something can be in a jar. Obviously different semantics there, and so we have these kinds of sense discriminations. All right. So for instance, we see two examples. We have the house owner Melissa. We have girl named Melissa. The semantic relationship is clearly defined. All right, let's move on now to these this row. Obviously, we're very well aware that just looking at that, you can't really know what these features are. Although once you've worked with it for a month or so, you can actually start reading that. But all you have to do is mouse over it, and it'll show you what it is. So it's so this house is number singular, and then we have various other things, which is what I want to show you now. So we can look at the whole feature set that we use in Linguist Assistant by clicking that button. And so we have features associated with every single level. Let's just look at some of the main ones. So noun phrase. Well, first of all, you can have at every level, every phrase level, we have a way to mark coordination. But the main thing at the noun phrase level is semantic roles. So we have sort of a limited amount of semantic roles that we use. We have this agent, patient, state, source, destination, instrument, addressee, beneficiary. These are the ones that we use. But in reality, our approach is that we do define these, but they really only make sense in the context of the verb that they're used with. So one example I like to use is destination. So for something like with the verb to walk, he walked to the store. Store is going to be marked as the destination. Whereas if it's the verb is give, the man gave the book to the girl. Well, the girl is going to be marked as the destination. But you can see just in those two examples that the destination of a give event and the destination of a walk event are really two very wildly different things, and in most languages would be translated differently. So what we do is we sort of center everything on the verb itself. So you would go in our rules that we have down here, and notice I didn't show you this. You can do things. You can arrange the screen in a couple different ways. So I usually like having it up here. You can go and these things that we call theta grid adjustment rules, which I didn't mention before, but they're very much like structural adjustment rules, but they're based on they're there to help you write very specific rules for all of the verbs to implement the theta grid or case frame of a verb. So for instance, let's just look at this one. Let's look at pray. So pray, what these rules do is they set up the case frame for this. And so there's a patient, so he and there's a destination, and there's a beneficiary. So you prayed to somebody, for somebody, like for John. Excuse me. And I can't even off the top of my head say what the patient it would be for this. But you then this theta grid adjustment rule is a very specific rule for this, and then in the output you can set up how you implement it. So for instance, each one of these roles might of these semantic roles might have in your language might have a different grammatical role. You might have to insert prepositions in there. Like in English, you would definitely insert a to preposition for the destination. You'd insert a for preposition for the beneficiary. And so it's my point then is that it's the combination of the case role and the verb frame that allows you to write rules that come out pretty decently. All right, let's get back to the feature set. That was noun phrases. For nouns, these are the features that are defined. Number, participant tracking, which I'll show you. Well, these are all of them. Let me go through them one at a time. So number, each noun in a text is semantically analyzed, whether it's singular, dual, trial, quadrial, possil, or plural. Now, not every single language, most languages don't do trial. Probably the good majority of them don't do dual. So for your language, you might treat everything down here all the same. You just might have singular and plural. And in fact, we have a way to collapse these features so that anything that was dual will just be marked as plural. But some languages, like the languages in Vanuatu, use these singular, dual, trial, and plural distinctions. And so we mark everything. Every single noun we mark with the exact number. Let's do the easiest ones first. Person, first person is first exclusive. Notice there's not a second person. First and second is first person inclusive. It's me and you. And then you can have first, second, and third also. Then second person is you. You can have second and third, like you and maybe somebody else. And then you can have third person. So that's person. It inherently takes care of inclusive and exclusive there. Proximity. So we have spatial proximities and temporal and contextual. So here's the normal set. Something that's like this table is near speaker and here, or just near speaker. Then that table is just near the listener. Then you can have remote within sight or remote out of sight. You can mark certain complex abstract nouns as temporally near or remote. So for instance, I can't even think of an example. Another one is this contextually near. So if you have a story like a man went to the bank, this man is contextually near. It's the one that we were just talking about in context. This, the proximity with the participant tracking together allows us to be able to generate very sophisticated outputs in a wide variety of languages. So this participant tracking marks whether something is the first mention in the text or a routine mention. You can also have frame and verbal things. So for instance, if you're in a restaurant, the waitress or waiter is frame inferable, and there are various other ones, but those are the main three: first mention, routine, and frame inferable. That, like I said, that in combination with the participant, that in combination with the proximity, like contextual proximity, allows us to do quite a bit in the generation. Let's just look at another one. Participant status. Some languages this will make a difference. Those specifications. Then in the surface realization, the main thing is this unambiguous pronoun. We use this to allow us to allows us to generate in a very conservative manner pronouns in various languages. What we do is we mark every text. We mark occurrences of nouns that are semantically unambiguous. So let me give you an example of something that we would mark as semantically unambiguous and one that we wouldn't. If you had the text, John fired Frank, he was a lazy worker. Well, that second sentence, the he, that refers to Frank, is semantically unambiguous, even though syntactically it is ambiguous. But you can, in any language in the world, in that context, you could use a pronoun there, because semantically we know who we're talking about, because the bosses aren't described as lazy, the worker is described as lazy, and that's a reason for getting fired. Now, change that. Get another example. John talked to Mary. Mary was angry. Well, in English, you could use a pronoun there. John talked to Mary. She was angry. But that's only sort of an accident of English, because our pronouns differentiate between male and female. That is not semantically unambiguous. Now, we would not mark that Mary as semantically unambiguous. Now, you could write other rules to generate a pronoun in there, but our thinking is that those kinds of rules to generate pronouns in situations like that are harder, definitely doable, and we've done them for all the languages we've worked with. But marking something that's semantically unambiguous is a very safe methodology. It allows you to generate safe pronouns, and a lot of times those safe pronouns, you'd be hard pressed to write a rule like for that John fired Frank, he was a bad lazy worker. You probably couldn't write a rule to generate a pronoun there, because it's all semantically. So that's the bottom line, is this unambiguous pronoun marks nouns that are semantically unambiguous, where you can where you could use a pronoun unambiguously from a semantic point of view. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to get rid of the features. Let's go to verbs. Look at the features associated with verbs. So time. We mark very specific time for every verb. Sorry. We mark a very specific time. So we mark whether something was immediately past, earlier today, yesterday, several days ago. I just had a language I was working with somebody in the other day, a Niger-Congo language, where it made a difference whether it was immediate past versus longer ago. They did something different in their language, and so that was an important distinction. Likewise, some languages might distinguish something, a year or so ago versus something relatively recently. And so we mark everything in the past and the present, the past and the future, very specifically, how far or ahead or behind it is. Then we of course have present tense, at present time. I want to say time because this is semantics. Then we also have something called discourse, which marks the discourse time in a narrative. So if you have a story, there's a sort of a narrative timeline, and discourse marks that it's on that narrative timeline. How we do relative time, for example, in a narrative, is something that we won't be talking about in this tutorial, but it is something that we do. We do, in addition to marking the main timeline of anything, we we put safe subordinate clauses, or non-storyline events in a narrative we mark with relative time, so that things can get generated correctly in languages. All right, so that's verbs. That's time. We have aspect. So the main ones we can say, he finished doing something. He started doing something. He stopped doing something. He's continuing to do it. Those are the main ones. Then there's habituals, like he has a habit of doing something. Moods, we do potentials and obligations. Here, there are actually other moods, other modalities like this that are lexically indicated. These are the ones. These were so common that we put them in a feature. Reflexivity. So there's like 10 people hitting each other versus reflexive, I'm hitting myself. Polarities, negatives and affirmatives, with the ability to put emphatics in there. We've started a little bit about putting directionals in here, and for instance in Vanuatu they have a very complex directional system. On the verbs of motion, you have to put whether it's towards the coast or away from the coast, things like that. We've just started that in our semantic representations. We mark whether any motion activity is towards the action or away from the action, and that little bit of information, even in Vanuatu languages, helps you to make much more natural sounding text. Okay, so that's it for that's the main ones. Like for adjectives, we have degrees, so comparatives and superlatives. You could say it's like too big, or you could the least, or the least expensive, things like that. Adverbs, similarly, you have degrees there, and adverbs, and those are the main ones. When I see the word, so I see conjunctions here, which makes me remember that I wanted to go back and show you a little bit of a difference. What we do for conjunctions. Conjunctions are this is getting back to a discussion about our ontology and our conceptual way of marking things. This is our way of having a very simple discourse grammar. And so for instance, we can have two sentences joined by some sort of connector, some sort of temporal thing, or some sort of causal thing. Those are the ones that we use now. We also we have these things called begin episodes to mark the beginning of an episode. We also have various relations that are used within a sentence, so you can relate two clauses to another with a kind of a similar set of meanings. So that then is about the end of what we want to do here to orient you to the semantics of what the conceptual world looks like, what are these features look like, and then just what it looks like visually in there. And we ran through a very quick example in Korean, showing you it doing some translation, and we showed you the 4 or so different kinds of rules that are used in Linguist system. So that then is the starting point. That's getting everybody up to date about what is in Linguist Assistant and basically how it works. Now the whole rest of the demo is going to be you getting a copy of Linguist Assistant, and we're going to work through writing some of these rules, writing some of those lexicon entries together. Hopefully in the end, another 3 or 4 hours of doing that together, you'll have experience in writing every single kind of the important kinds of rules. You'll know how to set up a lexicon with forms and features, and hopefully then be able to start work on using LA to document a language that you're interested in.